Hello everyone. Today we will talk about relapse. And I will touch on such subjects as what is relapse? Why do people relapse? What are the stages of relapse? What are the main causes? What are the consequences? And most importantly, is relapse really a part of recovery? Okay, so what is relapse? Basically, relapse is the manifestation of the illness after a period of remission. Yeah, when the illness has backed off and it manifests itself again. In the context of drug addiction or alcohol addiction, it is when a person uses drugs or alcohol after a period of sobriety. So, why do people relapse, really? The main cause of relapse, it's the absence of another coping mechanism. What's a coping mechanism? It is the mechanism that helps you deal with hardships, with losses, with uncomfortable feelings, yeah, with difficulties, with disappointments and stuff like that. So, of course, there are events that trigger relapses, and the most popular ones are I lost my job, I had a fight with my wife, or husband, or girlfriend, whatever. Somebody betrayed me, I'm disappointed in this community, I don't feel part of this new community, and stuff like that. But that's not what actually causes the relapse. It triggers it. But the relapse takes place because you don't have another coping mechanism. All you have is the old one. And the old one is escape. Escape from problems. Escape from reality. And suppress these uncomfortable negative emotions. That's why relapse happens. And relapse is in most cases a planned and very steady process. So we can distinguish three stages of relapse: the emotional relapse, the mental relapse, and the physical relapse. And the emotional one is when you stop doing the things that you decided to do in order to stay sober. So going to meetings, going to church, doing sports, and whatever is included in your plan of maintaining sobriety. You stop doing that. And if you are in a community of recovering addicts, people will start noticing and will start asking questions, and you don't like these questions when you are on this stage. So you will start to isolate yourself, and that's a very common pattern on this stage, is isolation. You start to isolate yourself from friends, family, from the community, from whatever. Okay? So that's a very distinguishable symptom. The second one, if you don't do anything on this first stage, follows the second one, and that's the mental stage of relapse. And that's when you start actually thinking about using. You haven't decided to use yet, no, but you start thinking about it. And what's another distinguishable trait or feature is that you start thinking more about the pleasant side of addiction. You don't really think about the downsides. You don't really think about the end result. You don't think about the withdrawals, the horrible, agonizing pain you were going through constantly, or what you had to do every day in order to obtain these drugs, how you lost all your relations, all your relationships, your career, everything. You don't think about that. You think about the good, pleasant sides of consuming drugs. That's very dangerous. And if you don't act on this stage as well, follows the next one, the physical relapse. That's when you actually take the drug or alcohol. And it's pretty straightforward. I don't think I have to comment on this at all. So what happens after the actual relapse, the physical relapse? You are just overwhelmed with shame and guilt. And you start really criticizing yourself. You become desperate. What have I done? I lost everything. I've ruined it all. And you start being really harsh on yourself. You idiot. You're worthless. So stupid. What have you done? You start talking to yourself in a really destructive manner, which creates a very dangerous, vicious circle. The more you criticize yourself, the more you need the drugs to suppress this uncomfortable feeling that it creates, the shame, the guilt, yeah, the desperate feeling of I lost everything. And the more you take the drug, the more you criticize yourself. And then the more you need the drug, and then the more you start criticizing. So you enter this very toxic, dangerous, vicious circle. But the worst part of it is, I think, that neuroplasticity changes the pathways in your brain. So what is neuroplasticity? Basically, our perception of the world, our life principles, our values, our coping mechanisms, these are all pathways in our brain, pathways of neurons. Okay? And they are rigid, they're solid. We go through them, we go with them through life. The consumption of drugs weakens them. They become plastic. And eventually they break. And the addiction rewires them. It creates new pathways in the brain, which are all aimed at consuming the drug. So you lose all your life principles. Your perception changes. Everything changes. So, when you relapse, when you start taking drugs again, everything you gained, let's say you've underwent rehabilitation and you've been sober for 7 years and you relapse, you start taking drugs again. Everything you gained, and I'm not talking about cars, money, wealth, and a wife, a family, you'll lose that as well. That goes without saying. But I'm talking about the new way you started to perceive life, the new life principles you gained, the new values you gained. You will lose everything, and everything will be aimed at consuming the drugs again. So I think that's the absolute worst part of the relapse. And that's one of the reasons that I don't like the statement that relapse is part of recovery. I don't like it. First of all, because a drug addict, just like an electrician, sometimes makes only one mistake. You only make it once because you're dead afterwards. So how is that part of your recovery if you relapsed and died? You don't get to recover after that. So I don't like this statement. And I don't like it because of neuroplasticity as well. Because you lose everything that you gain. And you have to start from scratch. What I do like about this, I mean, what I can say about relapse is that if you relapsed and you survived, you can always take this hard path to sobriety again, and you can always rebuild everything. You can always get everything back. You can always get your life back on track, always. So if you relapse, that's not the end of the world. But what I don't like is giving the addict this program that relapse is part of recovery, because there should not be space in the thought processes of an addict. There should not be space for relapse, because recovery is a rather unpleasant process. It's about disciplining yourself, right? It's about having to learn to cope with difficulties in a different way, having to face them. It's about responsibility. It's about learning to say, I'm sorry. It's about learning to say, I love you. It's about learning to say, help me. I'm not coping. It's about all that. It's very unpleasant. An addict will always be tempted to escape from problems, from reality, always. And if you leave that space, if you give him that program at the beginning that relapse is part of your recovery, he might very well take it. So I don't like this statement. I don't like it. If you relapsed, it's not the end of the world. You can always get your life back on track. But don't have such a mindset when going into recovery. Just don't. You can do without a relapse, I promise. You can do without it. There are many cases I personally know. So it doesn't have to be part of your recovery, okay? Now, what can we do to avoid relapse? Of course, there are no guarantees, but we certainly can increase our chances of avoiding relapse. So, first of all, never, ever allow yourself to think that I'm out of danger. It's no longer a threat for me. That's one of the biggest mistakes you can make in recovery, which can lead to relapse. And I've talked in another video of mine about 12 mistakes that people do in recovery that can lead to relapse. So you can click on this pop-up banner, or you can find the link in the description of this video, okay? Never allow yourself to think like that. And I don't care how long you've been in recovery. I don't care what achievements you have. I don't care if you have a super multi-million business, cars, wives, families. I don't care if you have a super status, a super reputation. I don't care. There will never come a time when we will be out of danger. It doesn't mean you have to live in fear. No, absolutely not. What it means that there are things you have to do all your life, all your entire life, in order to maintain your sobriety. And there are things that you will never be able to do again. Accept it. And the faster you accept it, the easier it will be. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one, whenever you talk about drugs, whenever you think about drugs, always reach the end of that thought. And the end is the absolute bottom where you've ended up. What I mean is, if you talk about, wow, I remember that time when we had drugs and it was so fun, we had lots of cash, lots of women, it was a beautiful part. How did everything end up eventually? Always reach the end. And remember the withdrawals, the absolute nightmare of looking for money every day, the loss of friendships, of relationships, of your career, of health, and the absolute bottom that you've reached. Always, and every story and every thought with the final destination of addiction. Then, know your triggers. Analyze your addiction and identify your triggers. What made you relapse? most of the time? Was it boredom? Was it failure? Was it conflicts? Identify them, know your enemy, and then you have to have a coping mechanism. You have to know step by step how will you act in these situations. Okay, so you have to generate these coping mechanisms, yeah, to work them out with a therapist, with a psychologist, or I don't know, with a person who has a big experience of sobriety, yeah, and who is competent to give you advice. Because it doesn't mean that if a person has been sober for 10 years, it doesn't mean that he's competent to give you advice. So you have to have this plan. For example, how will I act if I have a serious fight with my wife and she says that we're gonna divorce? How will I act if I lose my job? How will I act if I don't reach a certain very important goal that I set for myself? You have to know it in advance. You have to be ready for all this. If not, you might return to the old plan of escaping from these problems and these uncomfortable feelings. And here you can apply the rule of the 3 A's. Acknowledge, accept, and act. Acknowledge. You have to be very self-conscious. You have to pay attention to your emotions, your thoughts, your feelings, your reactions. You have to live in a very tight contact with your true self. And if something's wrong, you have to accept it. Don't try to create a counterweight. You know, like watching motivational videos just to make yourself feel better. Don't do stuff like this. Accept. If you're lonely, accept it. If you're sad, accept it. If you're disappointed in something, accept it. If you're angry about something, accept it and act. Lots of relapses happen because people don't solve their problems in real time, and they just keep storing them, which creates a huge emotional, psychological pressure, and people just seek relief and they relapse. Don't do it. I know a lot of cases, personally know a lot of cases where I'm asking a person, why did you relapse? And the answer is, I just had a lot on my mind. I stored a lot down deep inside. Why would you? Don't make this mistake. Solve your problems in real time, always. Don't make this mistake. And the last one. We know the 4 areas of our illness according to the 12-step program. Yeah, so it's biological, psychological, social, spiritual illness. Invest in all these 4 areas. Sleep well, eat well, exercise, have an active way of life. Doesn't mean you have to lift weights. I don't like it, but I walk a lot. I do gymnastics. I stretch myself in the morning. I'm active, okay? Go outside, be in the sun, talk to your friends, have a real social connection with people. Yeah, deep, meaningful conversations are incredibly fulfilling. Not to mention the fact that they cause all these hormonal secretions. Yeah, they're very, very good for us. I'm not talking about Facebook, Instagram, and stuff like that. No, I'm talking about real life connections. And the spiritual part. If you believe in God, go to church, by all means. Why not? Listen to preachers, of course. If not, practice the spirituality you understand. It doesn't matter. Just invest in all the 4 areas of your sobriety, basically, or your illness. So friends, a few words about my relapse. I've relapsed in 2011 after 9 months of rehab based on the 12 steps program. And I talk about this in my story of overcoming addiction. So you either press on the pop-up banner or find the link in the description below. Why did I relapse? Because I didn't have any coping mechanisms, none whatsoever. I did not gain them on my first rehabilitation. So what I had was what I always had: escaping from problems, escaping from reality, and suppressing uncomfortable emotions and feelings. That's what I had. That's the first mistake. The second one, I had no plan. I had no vision of my life in sobriety, none whatsoever. I didn't know what kind of a circle of friends I want to have. I didn't know what I want to do, what I want to learn, how I want to grow, how I want to develop myself, what kind of personal relationship do I want to have. I didn't know anything about that. What kind of financial situation do I want to have? Where do I want to work? I didn't know anything at all, so I had no plan whatsoever. Basically, I made all the classic mistakes I've mentioned in this video. So I eventually relapsed. I isolated myself, then I started thinking about the good times of drug use, and I relapsed. I ended up in prison, 7-year sentence after 5 more years of heroin consumption. So it was horrible. And relapsing is always much worse than the initial use of drugs. Trust me, it gets much worse every time. So friends, just monitor yourself. Yeah, live in close contact with yourself. If something is wrong, solve it. Don't store it. Don't delay solving your problems. Pay attention to everything I mentioned in this video. Stay safe, stay sober, stay happy. I wish you all the best. I'll see you soon.